in Quebec, we have an expression which is tissé serré, which is mean closely knitted in English, but it's closely woven in the sense of literal sense of the word. So to be tissé serré represents the French Canadian society from French background with some English, Irish, and Scottish descendant, and a few natives, but this part is very much erased from our history. As if you look at who composed this French Canadian society, initially it was about 5,000 men from France and 1,000 women. That was the starting French Canadian society. And as we evolve, we talk about this French Canadian descendant being tissé serré, being closely knitted, which bring us to why do we use knitted as a to reflect a society? If you go to ancient Greece, this is when we started to use to refer to the fabric of society and to refer to the artist as a weaver of the society, of the imagination of the society. And it's very interesting to see that it was also part of the rituals, like every year Athena, which is the goddess of wisdom. In the temple of Athena, they would change the peplos. The peplos was the woven piece. And this peplos would be woven by women for a whole year, and it would be changed. And in ancient Greece, 2,500 years ago, we started to refer of the society as something which is woven together, where everybody has its place. And now we see in Montreal, we're in a society in a total transformation. There have been many waves of immigration. We started with European and China. Well, first English immigration and Irish immigration, because the Irish were Catholics and in Quebec we were Catholics. So there was a flood of English immigration in Canada, because for some times French Canadians in around 1830s were in the majority in Canada. And to make Canada, it was not yet Canada, but to make Canada as it is, we needed to have more Anglophones, more English descendants. So there was a very heavy migration from England and Scotland and Ireland to have a majority of Anglophones in order to make in 1867 the Confederation of Canada. So there was a first very large immigration, well, at that time. And after that, there were waves of immigration for as workers purposes, like when there was a large Chinese immigration to build the railways. There were work of European fleeing the pogrom in Europe with the First World War, Second World War. But at that time, this immigration was mostly European. In 1967, in Montreal, we had the Universal Exhibition, and it was an opening to the world. Quebec, until that time, was, and until the beginning of the 60s, was a very closed society with 85% of the population being in the agricultural field, farmers, Catholic, French speaking, in the Protestant Anglo-Saxon world. So with this opening to the world, we started to have migrants from again all over the world, and from Egypt, from Armenia, from Greece. I'm talking about large flow of immigrants. And till the end actually, and in the early till the middle of the 70s, most of the immigrants were going to live, were learning English as they were coming to Quebec, because there was not much opening from the Catholic school, those Catholic school boards for immigrant children. For example, even Italians or Catholics in the 70s had to go to the Protestant English school board, but they had French Catholic schools in the same suburb. So it was not until the end of the 70s where there was or is it early 80? I don't remember exactly the year. That we had the law that forced the immigrants to go to Francophone schools. And with the early 80s, we also started to have a large waves of immigration from people from Asia, uh, mostly from Vietnam, and then from India, and from Africa, from North Africa. So the reality of in Montreal, which is like the metropole of Quebec, has changed a lot in the last 40 years. I've been working in schools, as I told you, for 30 years, and I see the classes changing so tremendously. Now, the school board where I'm working in the west part of the city, 83% of the children from primary school and high school are immigrants from the first and second generation. And 30% of these children are born outside of Canada. So it becomes a major challenge to integrate these children who are from all over the world, to teach them French as the main language as we are drawn into an Anglophone world, and to find to build common values when the values of the Korean manga, Korean and Japanese mangas are there, Hollywood movies. Everything is more attractive for immigrants than the French Canadian values, or not values, but French Canadian um, artistic scene. They don't feel the belonging, and I understand why, because there's very little space given to these immigrant kids or immigrants, young adult, in our televisual productions. So it's normal that they are attracted to something which is more international. So it's all a challenge in a school, in a class, to bring stories and to get to build a sense of belonging for the children. They are all in the same classroom. They are all in the same society. It's very hard for them to understand that this is their new reality. And for most of these kids, we are totally in pluriculturality. And what I find dangerous in the pluriculturality, it's like all solo cultural you have. You're Quebecer when you're at school, you're Indian or African when you're at home, and you're something else when you're in the street. So the kids deals with at least three identity. Then the idea of hybridity comes very important. So how these kids who grow with so many identity can build something which is holding together all their identity and not make them schizophrenic, say, okay, I am this when I'm at home, I'm like this, and when I'm in school I'm like this, but there's no connection, or very little connection. How can we build something which is inclusive and fluent, and where the child feels he doesn't feel as Osiris dismembered with different parts which are not connected. So this is the challenge I face when I'm in schools. And And just last example of this very fast changing society, I was just before Christmas went to school in Quebec City, where I grew up as a child, as a young adult. And this school has a totally new reality. 5 years ago, in that school, it was a homogeneous white school. And within 5 years, they have now 50% of the children going to that school were immigrants, just arrived in Canada. So the teacher don't know how to deal with it. There's a lot of adjustment needed by the teaching staff. Not only, and it has many layers. Of course, there's the language, then there are the family values, the religious values. We are in a I don't know. Wait, I'm searching for the word in English. I know it, but like secular. We are now in a secular school system, so we don't refer at religion. So what do you do with these Muslim kids that come in that are very religious in their family, and so how do you balance that? And all the values from the country and all the trauma or difficulties that children and their family go through. So how to link this? As a storyteller, as an organizer, I find that storytelling is one of the most powerful to create a new sense of belonging in the classroom. Telling stories to the children, they build a common imaginary. So I come with notebooks. I said the stories are in my memory, and I'm retelling stories from all over the world. Of course, that brings the other problem of cultural appropriation that I'd like to transform in cultural appreciation. As a storyteller, not having grown in a traditional form of story, how could I say that? I haven't grown in the countryside. I come from an intellectual family. I never referred to French Canadians. I never heard French Canadian story until I was an adult, and I read them in 2 books. So if I'm a storyteller, what am I going to tell? I started reading Russian tales and French tales before I read anything else. And I spent more as a young adult. I spent a lot of time in India, and I've heard more about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata than I heard about Odyssey. So cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation. So I come in the classroom with this idea of I'm when I choose a story, for me it's a layer of what a society dream, what everybody think of. So it's something that we have in common, and I'm telling stories from all over the world. In my experience, it's been very fascinating to see how for me to make links between stories, but also for children to make links through what they listen. For example, I was retelling a story about Eastern, about a beggar in a village who come at Eastern time, and that was named Eastern. And then I retell the whole story, and then the kid says, "Madam, I know this story, but in my country, the beggar is not called Eastern, and he doesn't come to pick up a ham, but he's called Ramadan, and he comes to pick up some of the Ramadan pudding, the rice pudding they prepare." It was the same story, and I could go on. I mean, I have many examples. I started to have this reflection with when I did my master degree. I work on a agoromo, which is a Japanese no play. And agoromo is the story of a celestial woman coming to Earth, putting her coat away, her feather coat. Fisherman comes, see the coat, grabs the coat, and don't want to give it back, and will accept to give it back to the celestial woman when she teaches him dance and music, and this is how music and dance came to earth, and then she's freed and go back to the world of above. And the same version of the myth in the native story, where it is a goose woman and it is a hunter who takes the moccasins, the leather shoes, and there's a whole process. Um, so the celestial woman, this goose woman, will stay with him for some times. And then when I started searching on these bird women or celestial women, well, I found motifs of these stories all over the world. And it's the same with the I grew up with the story of the goldfish, the little the Russian tale of the little goldfish that you take in the fisherman takes in his net, and then put back in the water, and the goldfish say, come and see me, and I'll give you what you want. And his wife has never enough. But then I discovered the first incarnation of Vishnu with the fish and the king, and say, hey, that's the same story. Basically, it's exactly the same story. So when you start working with stories, you start making connection, which is more and more and more. And when I work with the children, I work with this connection with them. I tell them that La Fontaine, Jean de La Fontaine, who wrote Fable, took inspiration from Aesop in ancient Greece, but also from India, from Pilpai. And when I tell that, well, suddenly the story is not the same, because the kids see that the culture is. I'll tell them the culture is not pure. The culture is made of métissage and exchange and uh, appropriation, but in a positive sense. Um, in biology, they explain that if you take a plant in a certain environment and you transplant it in another environment, the plant will transform. It will adapt. It might be hardly recognizable. It's the same plant, but then, which is sometimes you don't know where the plant started, and so it's the same with stories. So using these stories, I feel it creates a real sense of belonging for the children. I'm going to share with you some photos of the kids I'm working with, because sometimes, yeah, that's true. Images talk a lot. Sorry. Um, so I'm going to present you some of the projects I did. Oh, just a second. I've got to put it back. Sorry, it's coming. Regular program. They are
Sylvie, I can't hear you. Yes. Okay. Sylvie, I think you are muted. I can't hear you. Hmm? She's not muted. I think she's. Uh, yes, yes. It's probably a issue with her this thing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Yes, sorry, my just everything froze. I'm going to try sharing again, and I'll keep my camera closed for that time. Oh, there. Okay. So now, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you and also see your slide.
Okay, great. So, um, this is another project I use with another immersion classes. I use a tale, and we started to do a paper puppet, and the kids were reading the story about how the tiger got stripes. And in this group, I had again African kids, Asian kids, Korean kids, Spanish, well, not Spanish, but Latin American kids learning French. So it was a variety of children, and through the puppet theater and through a folk tale, it created a sense of belonging in the class. Another project I did with children was about La Fontaine. Then, because my class was very, very multi-ethnic, and La Fontaine is totally French, and how can you present French La Fontaine in the Quebec context by a French Canadian writer, Quebec writer, to immigrant kids and create link? Well, then I in my research, I discovered that La Fontaine came to know about Pilpai stories through François Bernier, who was in India for over 15 years. And so I integrated the character of Bernier, and we did a lot of